With regard to, Hezbollah and sort of the Iranian angle on things and the Lebanese angle, I don't follow sort of internal Hezbollah things as much as maybe Nicholas Blanford, who was here a few weeks ago, and others. So I wouldn't know exactly how to answer that. But I would say that among many in the community, the Shiite community, who are full supporters of Hezbollah and so on, but are aware that they are hostage, sort of, or stuck in a proxy situation which doesn't entirely relate to the South and to Lebanon. It relates to an enormous confrontation between an Iran that seems to be going nuclear and a nuclear Israel, and they're stuck in the middle. So the Hezbollah, the party, is very aware that it has to, maintain, of course, the support from Iran and so on and so forth, and has to protect itself from the next Israeli attack. But at the same time, it has no civil defense project, has no way to protect civilians, and it knows that any war will be enormously devastating to their community, and that will be a price that they as a party also have to deal with after the fact. So I think it concerns them, but they've chosen this path, or that path has been imposed on them somehow. And when there's so much money, so much power involved, it's maybe hard to say no sometimes, but here we are, stuck in this situation.
One question back here, and a question from the gentleman here. We'll take them one after the other.
Hi, Scott Wayne, SW Associates Development Consulting Practice based here in D.C. I'm working with the World Bank and the Lebanese government on tourism strategy. And I'm sorry to add another Hezbollah question to the mix, but it's been in the news lately that Hezbollah is getting into tourism. They've opened a museum. They're taking groups into the south. Is this a public relations play, or is it something bigger? Is it something more, but Hezbollah is changing their positioning within Lebanon? Or is it just for the sake of it?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Cole Backenfeld. I'm with the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, IFES, and I'm going to ask a non-Hezbollah question.
Excellent.
That's okay.
Are you going to win the next election?
You talked a little bit about the municipal elections in Minister Beirut and the reform package, and he made a couple of statements during those elections I just wanted to get your take on. I think it was after the second round of elections when there was a little bit lower turnout than expected. He attributed that to people's dissatisfaction with not having the reform package that they were anticipating. Other people were saying, no, it's just because they weren't competed. They were kind of pre-decided, and that's why it was low turnout. I want to get your take on that. And the second thing is, very early on in a news conference, he said, day 2 after elections is when we start talking about reform again. We're not going to let this go and let this sit for another few years. We're going to talk about this day 2 after the final round. What's your take on the political will to kind of continue that discussion, and do you see that really moving forward here? So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Hezbollah tourism, which is, yes. I don't think it's very significant. Hezbollah does present itself as a culture of resistance, and as had Iran before it, and as does Syria in a way. And Hezbollah has always said that it has no problem with economic, with tourism or the economy. There's no problem with sort of normal life and with foreigners coming to Lebanon and all of that. So the fact that they opened this sort of resistance exhibit is not terribly remarkable. I wouldn't. Other than it underlines the fact that although in the West or the U.S. people say, "Oh, you're traveling to Lebanon. It's so there's Hezbollah there," as if it's Al Qaeda or the Taliban. And obviously, anybody who's been there knows, the safest place probably to go is a Hezbollah area, and because they're very disciplined and there's no untoward things taking place. So they've always been sort of within limits because they have their military areas, which you're not allowed to go to. But otherwise, they're part of the government. They're part of. The real problem with Hezbollah and tourism is that because they're involved. As Rafiq Hariri always complained, he's trying to rebuild Lebanon as a center for business, banking, and tourism. And they're, leading, a war to liberate Jerusalem with Ahmadinejad. that doesn't really encourage banking, tourism, and all of that. But on electoral reform, it's fairly simple in the sense that, as you know, if you've followed Lebanese electoral law, we have a majoritarian block vote system, which doesn't exist in this form in any other country on the globe, which is that competing lists run against each other, and any list that gets a few votes more than any other list gets 100% of all of the seats in the district, which means that it's very easy to create lists that prevent any possibility of any opposition ever getting into parliament. So what happened in Beirut, which is a big district, is once the Future Movement and some allies made a list, didn't make sense for anybody to even try to run against it. So supporters of that list said, well, why even bother? They're going to win anyway, so I'll, do something else. And opponents didn't bother because there was no credible opposition to it. To my mind, I agree with Minister Baroud and others that proportional representation has to become somehow part of Lebanon's political reality, or else we're going to be stuck for too long in this system. The issue of when is reform going to be put on the table, I think we're in day two today, in the sense that Baroud had a rough time running elections on 4 different Sundays, and he deserves a break. And I think he and the president and some in government are serious about putting this on the table again. Now, interestingly, the politicians that are in government today, the president, the prime minister, Hezbollah, Aoun, Baroud, and others, they all present themselves sort of as reformers. They all talk the talk to some degree, and that's better than nothing. But what worries me is in crunch time, the oligarchy makes the typical deals, and I think there was a deal made between the budget and the election law, and there might be another deal. None of the big parties want proportional representation. Very few of them really want administrative decentralization. So I'm still skeptical, but I think there's going to be a healthy discussion about it, and there is a glimmer of hope that something might be achieved. Speaking in Washington or somewhere else, I might say it's useful for the international community to continue to say to the Lebanese and maybe to others, continue reforming. Nobody's imposing on you anything, but given that the U.S. provides aid to Lebanon, Europe provides, I think they have a right to say, well, every country needs to reform, and to encourage Lebanon along that path as well.
We've got a question in the back here and a question from Stanley. This fellow here, and then...
my name is Eddie Sadi. I'm an interested party in the of Lebanon. Let me just say that. Best way I can put it. My interest actually is on the flip side, in Christian militantism in Lebanon. Okay, now it's on.
No. When you said Christian, it just came
Yeah. But there is a certain uneasiness that I've picked up, at least from members of my family, that the Christians themselves are arming certain Christian parties versus others. My interest is, essentially, what's your take on that? And do you think that will eventually become a problem? You were mentioning...
What's the question, though? I didn't quite get...
the question is about Christian militants in Lebanon.
Okay.
Are they arming?
Okay.
That's the question.
Okay, and then right over here.
Stanley Cobra with the Cato Institute. In The Prince, Machiavelli says, the prince should be try to be both loved and feared. But if you have to choose one or the other, better to be feared than loved. A year ago, President Obama gave the speech in Cairo. The United States was more loved in the Middle East. Are we still loved? Are we feared? If we are neither loved nor feared, then where are we?
Easy question there.